Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today, we're doing part 2 of Little Blue Book number 124, and it is titled The Theory of Reincarnation Explained. Written by, H.M. Tichenor. And this was written, all of these books were written in the 1920s. This one has the copyright date missing. But generally, the 1920s is when most of these were written. I've come across a few that are written in the 19-teens or even the 19-aughts. But, okay, let's see. Alright, here we go. The intellect, or conscious mind, is described as the self-consciousness, in which man forms a conception of the I. It is the mind that analyzes, classifies, and draws conclusions. Among the lower animals, as well as among the lowest examples of human beings, there is very little intellect displayed. The lower forms of life, including plant life, live in the instinctive mind. The lower animals, like primitive man, are only concerned with the physical life and the satisfying of primitive wants. It was thousands of years before evolution developed the first sign of conscious mind, or intellect, and yet the principle of intellect was there, just as the soul principle was there, awaiting the process of development. The spiritual mind, which has been called the superconscious mind, is that principle of mind disclosed in part of the race that exhibits kindness, love of humanity, love of justice, and longing for a humane society. It is the source of inspiration to poets, painters, sculptors, and musicians. The spirit itself, the immortal soul, the seventh principle of mind, is, according to the yogi philosophy, a ray from the central sun, the real self. It is a drop from the spirit ocean, a particle of the sacred flame. It is that something within us which is the cause of our evolution through all the weary ages. It was the first to be, and yet it will be the last to appear in full consciousness. Lovers of humanity, who have appeared from age to age, have disclosed the soul of man to a race of undeveloped souls. The philosophy of the East is venerable with age. It can be traced to the wisdom of the Chaldeans. Its researches are found in the philosophies of ancient Greece, its findings in the school of Western science. Man, the highest development of life on this planet, is a being of many experiences. He has passed through many lives. He is destined to pass through many more. In both body and mind, he carries the evidence of these experiences, these past lives, and the evidence of new experiences and future lives is made manifest in his continually increasing aspirations and visions. The law of his life is the changeless and ceaseless law of change. In his bones, in his body, in his blood, man manifests the life of the mineral kingdom. The mineral substances form part of the structure. His physical life manifests the life of the plant kingdom. His body carries the story of the lower animal life. Man has experienced all of these. He has passed through their lives. In the body of man, as well as in the body of other living creatures, is found the record of these many experiences, these many past lives. And in the instinctive mind and race memory, the characteristics of these past lives exist. In human embryos of 3 to 5 weeks, development appear in human embryos of 3 to 5 weeks development appear the gill slits of the fish. There is also found the notochord, the dorsal stiffening axis of the lower vertebrae, which appears as the backbone develops, in man as well as in other mammals. 3 distinct pairs of kidneys appear in the early embryonic stage. The first kidneys develop at the stage of when the fish gills are formed and are identical to the kidneys of the lower species of fishes. The second kidney appears at the amphibian reptilian stage of embryonic life, and with the amphibia, such as frogs, crocodiles, beavers, and like creatures that exist in both air and water, persist throughout life. I didn't know beavers were listed as amphibians. The third kidneys succeed these in the development of man, as well as in other mammals, and remain, while the other 2, the useless ones so far as the life of man is concerned, perish. Thus has nature preserved the story of man's experiences, his past lives. He has lived them all. He will live them many more. Evolution does not cease in its process with the present development of the highest order of man. Abundance of other similar evidences of man's experiences, his past lives, can be found in any standard work on biology. LeConte writes, "By the law of heredity, each generation repeats the form and structure of the previous, and in the order in which they successively appeared. But there is a tendency for each successive appearing character to appear a little earlier in each successive generation, and by this means time is left over for the introduction of still higher new characters. Thus, characters which were once adult are pushed back to the young, and then still back to the embryo, and thus place and time are made for each generation to push on still higher. In the Western world, psychology, from an analytical basis, is a comparatively new study. With the philosophers of the East, it is very old. There alone can be found a solution, or at least anything that offers a solution to life. There, writes Max Muller, the human mind has most fully developed some of its choicest gifts, has most deeply pondered on the greatest problems of life, and has found solutions of them which well deserve the attention of those who have studied Plato and Kant, and above all who have through the centuries developed the choicest gifts of the human mind, who have most deeply pondered on the problems of life, or the yogi philosophers of India. This tribute is due them whether or not one accepts their solutions in their entirety. And these solutions, at least, in the words of Max Muller, deserve the attention of all students of life. These solutions present a reason to life, while the materialist school, life becomes a riddle. To the question that remains unanswered with the Western materialist, how did life originate? The philosophers of the East reply, life has no origin. In some form, somewhere, it has always existed, and always will. It has neither beginning nor end, but undergoes constant change. The Eastern philosophers offer a solution to the problem of life, where the Western materialists offer none. The accepted view of the materialist of the Western school is omne viam e vivo, all life from life, under known existing conditions, and then they maintain that life, some way, proceeded from the lifeless in its first manifestation on this earth or elsewhere. The materialists who ridicule the miraculous fall back upon a most astounding miracle to sustain their materialism, for nothing short of a miracle could create life from the lifeless. Pause. When the race is in sufficient numbers reaches spiritual consciousness, exploitation and war will be no more. Human brotherhood will begin to appear. Man, coming into his own, into a realization of his soul, will create a society befitting his awakened perceptions. The longing for the higher, the nobler life does not come from the instinctive mind, neither does it come from the intellect. It comes from the messages sent by the soul to the awakened spiritual mind. Such is the teaching of the Eastern philosophers of the principle of man that are apparent today among the most developed of the race: the instinctive mind, the intellect, and the spiritual mind. Then comes the last known or conceivable principle of man, hardly made manifest in the present development of the race: the soul, the spirit itself, without which the long ages of evolutionary process would end in utter defeat, would end in falling short of the only conceivable rational purpose of life. Filled with awe and admiration as he contemplated the law of evolution, Charles Darwin declared, "When I view all things not as special creations, but as the lineal descendants of some few beings which lived long before the first bed of the Cambrian system was deposited, they seem to me to become ennobled. Judging from the past, we may safely infer that not one living species will transmit its unaltered likeness to a distant future." Together, the law of evolution, traveling with it, virtually a part of it, the philosophers of the East recognize the law of reincarnation. It must be admitted that this would solve many otherwise perplexing problems. It would account for the race memories carried by the instinctive mind. Thus do the evolutionary process go on, until an order of man shall appear vastly higher than can now be conceived. A strange doctrine to many, and yet it is as old as the race, recognized in the crude way by primitive man. Reincarnation working with the evolutionary process, a part of these processes from the lower life to the higher, would solve many things we all see in life. In man can be seen the forms of many lives. What compassion, says Emerson, do these imprisoning forms awaken? You may sometimes catch the glance of a dog, which lays a kind of a claim to sympathy and brotherhood. What? Somewhat of me down there? Does he know it? Can he too, as I, go out of himself, perceive relations? It was in this glance that Ovid got the hint of his metamorphosis, Chaldasia of his transmigration of souls. In a mixed assembly, we have chanced to see not only a glance at Abigail, so grand and keen, but also in other faces the features of the mink, of the bull, of the rat, and the barn door fowl. What, then, constitutes the spirit, the soul, the seventh principle of man? It is the real self. It is the I, the consciousness of which comes at times even if the I itself is hardly understood. When we understand the two lower minds, the instinctive mind and the intellect, and we can also realize a spiritual mind. But these are not the real self, the I. These are the not I's that can be analyzed, can be set in a class by themselves and mentally viewed. The real self, the I, is far more than these, is far above them. Then what is the I, the real self, the immortal soul of man? Is it hidden, says yogi philosophy, in the lower form of life, even in the lower forms of human life, by many sheaths that shut out its light? When the real self begins to arouse itself from its sleep, its dreams vanish from it, and it begins to see the world as it is, and to recognize itself in reality, and not as the distorted thing of its dreams. The savage and barbarian are scarcely conscious of the I. Pardon me. They are but a little above the animal in point of consciousness, and their I is almost entirely a matter of the consciousness of the wants of the body, the satisfaction of the appetites, the gratification of the passions, the securing of personal comfort, the expression of lust, savage power, etc. In the savage, the lower part of the instinctive mind is the seat of the I. If the savage could analyze his thoughts, he would say that the I was the physical body, the said body having certain feelings, wants, and desires. Not only is this true of the savage, but even among so-called civilized men of today, we find many in this stage. They use their thinking powers for the gratification of their bodily desires and cravings, and really live on the plane of the instinctive mind. Such a person may speak of my mind or my soul, not from a high position, where he looks upon the things from the standpoint of a master who realizes his real self, but from below, from the point of view of the man who lives on the plane of the instinctive mind, and who sees above himself the higher attributes. And yet, the soul is there, awaiting its development. It is there, just as the intellect is sleeping and awaiting development in the instinctive mind of the lower forms of life. As the physical body would be meaningless without the instinctive mind, so the instinctive mind becomes meaningless without the intellect. And so also the intellect becomes meaningless without the soul. Nay, without the soul, the universe itself becomes meaningless, becomes inexplainable, becomes the riddle that the materialist Haeckel pronounced it to be in his riddle of the universe. Without the soul of man, the law of evolution, a law more wonderful than the intellect can conceive, has wasted its prodigious process, has failed to reach the only consummation that its tireless and restless energy points to as its manifest purpose. Consider, writes Maurice Maeterlinck, the earth in its origin. At first, a shapeless nebula, becoming gradually more and more condensed. Next, a globe of fire, of rocks and fusion, whirling for millions of years through space, with no other object than that of forming into a mass and cooling, an inconceivable incandescence, which none of our sources of heat can suggest to us, an essential, scientific, absolute barrenness, which may well have proclaimed itself irredeemable and everlasting. Who would have thought that from these torrents of matter in eruption, which seem to have destroyed forever all life, or the least germ of life, there would emerge each and every form of life itself, from the greatest, the strongest, the most enduring, the most impetuous, the most abundant, down to the least visible, the most precarious, the most inferior, the most extraneous. Who could have dared foresee that they would give birth to what seems so utterly alien to the liquefied or viscous rocks and metals that alone form the surface, the nucleus and the very entity of our globe? I mean our human intelligence and our consciousness. Is it impossible to imagine a more unexpected evolution and ending? What could astonish us after so great an astonishment? And what are we not entitled to hope of a world, which after being what it was, has produced what we see and what we are, considering that it started from a sort of negation of life, from integral barrenness, and from worse than nothing in order to end in us? Where will it not end after starting from ourselves? If its birth and formation have elaborated such prodigies, what prodigies may not its existence, its indefinite prolongation, and its dissolution held in store? There are an immeasurable distance and inconceivable transformations between the one frightful material of the early days of the human thought of this moment, and there will doubtless be a like distance and like transformations as difficult to conceive between the thoughts of this moment and that which will succeed it in the infinity of time. It is well, sometimes, to tell ourselves, especially in these days of distress and discouragement, that we are living in a world which has not yet exhausted its future, and which is much nearer to its beginning than to its end. It was born but yesterday, and has only just disentangled its original chaos. It is at the starting point of its hopes and of its experience. We believe that it is making for death, whereas all its past, on the contrary, shows that it is much more probably making for life. In any case, as its years pass by, the quantity, and still more the quality, of the life which it engenders and maintains tend to increase and to improve. It has given us only the first fruits of its miracles. And in all likelihood, there is no more connection between what it was and what it is than there will be between what it is and what it will be. No doubt, when its greatest marvels burst into being, we shall no longer possess the lives which we possess today. But we shall still be there under another form. We shall still be existing somewhere on its surface or in its depths. It is not utterly improbable that one of its last prodigies will reach us in our dust, awaken us, and recall us to life, in order to impart to us the share of happiness which we had not enjoyed, and to teach us that we were wrong not to interest ourselves on the further side of our graves in the destiny of this earth of ours, whereof we had never ceased to be the immortal offspring. No evidence of the immortality of the soul could be more conclusive than the evidences of the evolutionary process in the law of life. To this conclusion came the great naturalist Alfred Russel Wallace, who, together with Darwin, gave to the Western world the Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution and natural selection. There are other evidences of immortality offered, but in nature herself, our common mother, can, if we will but study her wondrous ways, be found the evidence of the soul, the last principle to manifest itself in the mind of man. Without this principle, without this supreme and necessary completement to complete the mind of man, the law of life becomes an exhibition of magic manipulated by mysterious jugglers. The soul, the immortal life principle, alone answers the question that materialists cannot answer. What is life? The soul becomes the I, the real self, that Ingersoll, in a tribute to the memory of John G. Mills, was so beautifully expressed. He was not a Christian. In the Eden of his hope, there did not crawl and coil the serpent of eternal pain. In many languages he sought the thoughts of men, and for himself he solved the problem of the world. With him, immortality was the eternal consequences of his own acts. He believed that every pure thought, every disinterested deed, hastens the harvest of universal good. All hope to meet again the loved and lost. In every heart there grows this sacred flower. Immortality is a word that hope, through all the ages, has been whispering to love. The miracle of thought. The miracle of thought we cannot understand. But let us believe that over the cradle nature bends and smiles lovingly above the dead, and benediction holds her outstretched hands. The school of experience. Eternity may be but an endless series of these migrations, which men call deaths, abandonments of home after home, ever to fairer scenes and loftier heights. Age after age, the spirit may shift its tent, fated not to rest in the dull asylum of the heathen, but carrying with it evermore its two elements, activity and desire. Bulwer Lytton. In offering metapsychosis as the school of experience, a philosophy that solves the problem of life, E.D. Walker, in Reincarnation, a Study of Forgotten Truths, London, 1888, writes, "The broadest intelligence leads us directly into the evolutionary aspect of reincarnation. In this view, the present life is one grade of a stupendous school in which we are being educated for a destiny so far beyond our comprehension that some call it a kind of deity. Even though we have descended below former altitudes, the only path to the absolute lies through the sensuous earthly veil. Sin itself, after we have escaped it, will lead to a mightier result than would be possible without it, or it would not be permitted. The richest trees of all the forest spring from the unclean miasmic fens. We penetrate the animal existence in human form more successfully than would be possible if we transmigrated into all the species of zoology. For here we carry sufficient intelligence, along with the material condition, to comprehend these creatures around us which cannot understand themselves. The highest individuals of mankind, the true prophets and poets, attain this intimate communication with nature, this mastery over the lower creation, which demonstrates their fitness for introduction to a higher. In his essay on the Swedish scientist, philosopher, and mystic Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772, Emerson writes, pause. Emerson writes, "In common parlance, what one man is said to learn by experience, a man of extraordinary sagacity is said, without experience, to divine. The Arabians say that Abdul Khan, the mystic, and Abdul Ali Sina, the philosopher, conferred together. And on parting, the philosopher said, 'All that he sees, I know.' And the mystic said, 'All that he knows, I see.' If one should ask the reason of this intuition, the solution would lead us into that property which Plato denoted as remanence, and which is implied by the Brahmins in the tenet of transmigration. For all things in nature being linked and related, and the soul having hitherto known all, nothing hinders but that any man who has recalled to mind, or, according to the common phrase, has learned one thing only, should of himself recover all his ancient knowledge, and find out again all the rest, if he have but courage, and faint not in the midst of his researches. On the scientific knowledge of Swedenborg, the mystic reread. There is no doubt that Swedenborg anticipated many scientific facts and positions that are usually regarded as of much more modern date. It was only towards the end of the 19th century that his voluminous writings began to be properly collected and examined, with the result of proving that there were hardly one department of scientific activity in which he was not far ahead of his time. His work on paleontology shows him the predecessor of all the Scandinavian geologists, and his contributions in this field alone would have been sufficient to perpetuate his fame. He was also a great physicist, and had arrived at the nebular hypothesis theory of the formation of the planets and the sun long before Kant and Laplace. Pardon me. His theory of light and theory of the cosmic atoms were equally astonishing. He wrote a lucid account of the phenomena of phosphorescence, and adduced a molecular magnetic theory which anticipated some of the chief features of the hypothesis of today. The great French chemist Dumas gives him the credit for the first attempt to establish a system of crystallography. He was the first to employ mercury for the air pump, and devised a method of determining longitude at sea by observations of the moon among the stars. He suggested the use of experimental tanks for testing the powers of ship models, invented an ear trumpet for the deaf, improved the common house stove of his native land, cured smoky chimneys, took a lively interest in machine guns, and even sketched a flying machine. In no field were Swedenborg's researches more noteworthy than in those of physiological science. It is clear that Swedenborg showed 150 years before any scientist that the motion of the brain was synonymous with the respiration and not with the action of the heart and the circulation of the blood. A discovery the full bearings of which are still far from being realized. He had arrived at the modern conception of the activity of the brain as the combined activity of its individual cells. The cerebral cortex, and more definitely the cortical elements, nerve cells, formed the seat of the activity of the soul, and were ordered into departments according to various functions. His views as to the physiological functions of the spinal cord are also in agreement with recent research, and he anticipated many of the preeminent offices of the ductless glands which students of the present time are only beginning to discover. Up to middle age, Swedenborg's position was that of a scholar, a scientist, but a profound change was coming over him, which led him to leave the domain of physical research for that of psychical and spiritual inquiry. Neither by geometrical nor physical nor metaphysical principles had he succeeded in reaching and grasping the infinite and the spiritual, or in elucidating their relation to man and man's organism, though he had caught glimpses of facts and methods which he thought only required confirmation and development. Late in life, he wrote to Oettinger that he was introduced by the Lord first into the natural sciences, and thus prepared, and indeed from the year 1710 to 1745, when heaven was opened to him. The latter event is described by him as his introduction into the spiritual world. Before his illumination, he had been instructed by dreams and enjoyed extraordinary visions and heard mysterious conversations. The life of religion, he said, is to do good. The kingdom of heaven is a kingdom of uses. The attention of modern psychologists is now being drawn to his doctrine of the relation of the elements of the universe to the membranes of the body. Encyclopedia Britannica, article in Swedenborg. Into this world at times comes colossal characters that stand like mileposts in the long journey of human life. Whence came they? Heredity does not account for them, else their ancestry would disclose it. Their propensity, even greater than themselves, demonstrate it. What other solution may there be, save that these have lived other lives, have gained their greatness through former experiences? Buddha and Jesus, incarnations of brotherhood and peace, without which society is not yet truly human. Homer, whom the Greeks named a god. Shakespeare, son of a cobbler. Raphael and Angelo, Wagner and Beethoven. Heredity to these answers not. The answer is offered in the words of Francis Bowen. For this is the universal law of being, whether of matter or mind. Everything changes, nothing dies in the sense of being annihilated. What we call death is only the resolution of a complex body into its constituent parts. Nothing that is truly one and indivisible being lost or destroyed in the process, in combustion or any other rapid chemical change, according to the admission of the materialists themselves. Let's see, how many pages do we have left? Okay, quite a few. All right, well, let's see. Maybe not. Maybe we will finish. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep, we're going to finish. But first, I'm going to take a drink. Not an atom of matter is ever generated or ever ceases to be. It only escapes from one combination to enter upon another. Then the human soul, which, as we know from consciousness, is absolutely one and indivisible, only passes on after the dissolution of what was once its home to animate another body. Our future life is not, at any rate, not while the present administration of this world's affairs continues, to be some inconceivable form of merely spiritual being. It will be clothed again with a body, which may or may not be in part the same with the one which it had just left. Leibniz held that the soul is never entirely divorced from matter, but carries on some portion of what was its earthly covering into a subsequent stage of existence. We can easily imagine and believe that every person now living in its representation of someone who lived perhaps centuries ago under another name in another country. It may be not with the same line of ancestry, and yet one and the same with him in his innermost being and essential character. His surroundings are changed. The old house of flesh has been torn down and rebuilt, but the tenant is still the same. He has come down from some former generation, bringing with him what may be either a help or a hindrance, namely, the character and tendencies which he there formed and nurtured. And herein is retribution. He has entered upon a new stage of probation, and in it he has now to learn what the character which he there formed naturally leads to when tried upon a new and perhaps broader theater. If this be not so, tell me why men are born with characters so unlike and with tendencies so depraved, in a sense far more literal than was intended by the poet. It may be true of every country churchyard that some mute and glorious Milton there may rest, some Cromwell, guiltless of his country's blood. They bring with them no recollections of the incidents of their former life, as such memory would unfit them for the new part which they have to play. But they are still the same in the principles and modes of conduct, in the inmost spirit of action, which the forgotten incidents of their former life have developed and strengthened. These inborn tendencies may be either exaggerated or subdued by the lessons of a new experience, by the exercises of reflection, and by habitually heeding or neglecting the monitions of conscience. But they still exist as original tendencies, and as such they must make either the upward or downward path more easy, more natural, and more likely to reach the goal so remote that it would otherwise be unattainable. A number of years ago, when Joseph Hoffmann, then a child but 10 years old, was astonishing music lovers with his exquisite rendering of the most difficult concertos, the Boston Herald said, "It almost seems as if the spirit of some great composer has been put into this boy by nature, waiting to be developed in accordance with our modern art, to shine forth again in all its glory in his work." Of the theory of reincarnation, the eminent Scottish writer William Knight has said, "The ethical leverage of the doctrine is immense. Its motive power is great. It reveals as magnificent a background to the present life, with its contradictions and disasters, as the prospect of immortality opens up an illimitable foreground, lengthening out the horizon of hope. It binds together the past and the present and the future in one ethical series of causes and effects, the inner thread of which is both personal to the individual and impersonal, connecting him with two eternities, one behind and the other before. With peculiar emphasis, it proclaims the survival of moral individuality and personal identity, along with the final adjustment of external conditions to the internal state of the agent. There is in each incarnation but one birth, one life, one death, says a philosopher of India. It is folly to duplicate these by persistent regards for the past, by present cowardice or fear of the future. There is no time. It is eternities, now that man mistakes for past, present, and future. Liberate thyself from evil actions by good actions. In a work entitled The Memory of Past Births, written in the last century by Charles Johnston, the following details are given of persons having a memory of a former existence. There are today, as there have always been, many who remember. One need only ask to find men and women who have a clear and definite vision of things that befell them in other lives. I have known many who could tell and were ready to tell the right inquirer. Let me give details of some of these. One remembered clearly a temple ceremony in a shrine hollowed out between the paws of some great beast, telling even the form of the landscape, the color of the sky, as he had seen them, when looking back through the door. He described, without knowing it, a scene in ancient Egypt, for the shrine is cut out between the paws of the Egyptian Sphinx, a shrine of which he knew nothing, remembering only the clear picture, but having no sense of where it was. He also had a quite clear vision of a hillside in India, a memory belonging to yet another life, and his description here was equally vivid and true. Yet another spoke of many lives remembered, one including a scene in a temple in Inner China, where a ceremony of the mysteries was being performed. He had a clear sense of his own place in the temple, of the words spoken, of the ritual carried out. And he also had a definite memory of two other births, with details of names and places, vivid as if they had happened yesterday. A third remembered places and names down to minute and often bizarre and unexpected details of 7 consecutive births, and all of these were in a continent other than that in which the present personality was born. One birth, the place of which was remembered with especial accuracy, had been verified as a local color and circumstance by the man himself. Another had fallen in a land he had never visited, but local details of which were familiar to him. Let these three cases stand, taken at random from many. They show that it is with the memory of past births as it was a generation ago with apparitions. It is impossible to raise the subject in a general audience without finding someone who remembers something, and whoever goes further and asks among the students of mysticism and occult philosophy will soon meet with quite definite and clearly marked memories in such abundance as to bring the matter outside the region of doubt or conjecture altogether. Based upon the memory of two distinct lives, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote his story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. These phenomena of what is termed alternating consciousness have formed themes for various writers. Baron Dupel's Philosophie des Mystiques gives a number of cases claimed to be of actual occurrence, of which the following is an illustration. Miss R. enjoyed naturally perfect health and reached womanhood without any serious illness. She was talented and gifted with a remarkably good memory and learned with great ease. Without any previous warning, she fell one day into a deep sleep, which lasted many hours. And on awakening, she had forgotten every bit of her former knowledge, and her memory had become a complete tableau rase. She again learned to spell, read, write, and reckon, and made rapid progress. Some months afterward, she again fell into a similarly prolonged slumber, from which she awake to her former consciousness, i.e., in the same state as before her first long sleep, but without the faintest recollection of the existence or events of the intervening period. This double existence now continued, so that in a single subject there occurred a regular alternation of two perfectly distinct personalities, each being unconscious of the other, and possessing only the memories and knowledge acquired in previous corresponding states. Similar instances of complete loss of memory, of the person concerned completely forgetting his former identity and assuming an entirely different one, are not of such rare occurrence, but that doubtless the reader has known or heard of them. Men and women have disappeared from their homes and have finally been located, living in some other locality, as an entirely different personality. And this, without any reason whatsoever for hiding their former identity. These instances generally follow a sickness in which the ego has wandered away from present scenes. Is it any wonder, then, that the memory of former existences become lost, save in rare cases? And how many lives may there be, slumbering for the while within our being? And what do these instances indicate? Where one life is laid aside and another taken up. Our body, said Plotinus, is the true river of Lethe, for souls plunged into it forget all. It is written of Frederick von Ottingen that in his old age he became an innocent child, leaving his study where he had written many books and his library, whose volumes were now sealed to him. He would go to the streets and join the children in their plays, and spend all his time sharing their delights. The profound scholar was stripped of his intellect and became a venerable boy, lovable and kind, as in all his busy life. He had bathed in the river of Lethe before his time. We have lived many lives. Both our bodies and minds bear witness to this. The evidence found in our bodies is recognized by modern science. The evidence found in our minds is being perceived dimly perhaps as yet by modern psychologists. By the experiences of the past, we are molding the future. By our past errors, we learn the better way to go. Travelers, we, from eternity to eternity, learning the way of wisdom as we come and go, learning at last that all life is the expression of universal life, evolving from lower forms to higher, that birth and death are but phases of the ceaseless law of change. That is the end of book number 124, The Theory of Reincarnation. Thank you for listening, and join me in our next book.